Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. We will begin with our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it, I perceive it, and now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. Today's devotion is called The Name of God. And here is our affirmation. It's a pretty long one. If you want to say it with me, you can. If you just want to listen, feel free. All right. I will not allow my individual religious beliefs to further separate the corporate human family. The name I call God is not God's name. It is just one of many names humans use in an attempt to name the unnameable, define the undefinable, describe the indescribable, eternal, I am that I am. Today, I will neither curse the darkness nor unconsciously add to it. Instead, I will consciously create righteousness, peace, and joy by allowing the light and love within me to be manifested all around me. Whew. Okay. So it's pretty obvious. Benny and I were speaking before we came on air that my brother wrote today's devotion because he always writes the long affirmations. But that was a good one. So let's get right to the text. According to the Bible, which time out, I'm only 4 words in, but I want to stop and say this. We say a lot around here that the Bible is not God's word to man, but rather man's word about God. Similarly, as was just pointed out in the affirmation, the name I call God, or the name anyone calls God, is not really his, her, its name. It's just what we call him. It is our attempt, as it also said, to name an essence that is actually unnameable. And we're going to talk a little further. We're going to go a little further into this concept during the teaching today. But I find it so interesting how many people who call themselves Christians and who are presumably trying to follow in the footsteps of Christ get this so wrong. Some years ago, around Christmas time, I had gone to dinner with a few old girlfriends of mine from high school, several of whom I had not seen in many years. And we had reconnected with each other on Facebook and had just decided to go have dinner to catch up with each other. So at the end of the meal, when the waitress brought the check to the table, she said, "Have a nice evening, ladies, and happy holidays." At which point, the woman that was seated directly across from me said in a very loud, very condescending, sarcastically and snarky voice, "Merry Christmas." And the rest of us kind of just looked at her funny because it shocked us. And I think one of the women there said, "What was that all about?" To which she replied, "This is still America." And I remember the mental gymnastics I was having to go through to even understand what she meant by that. And through a little further conversation, I realized that this was the time when some of the news channels were pushing the narrative that there was a war on Christmas in America, and that if you said anything other than Merry Christmas, regardless of whether or not you even celebrated Christmas, whether or not you were of a different faith, that meant you were crossing Christ out of Christmas and that you were also somehow unpatriotic. So I tried to offer to her that the poor little waitress had probably been instructed by the management of the restaurant to say Happy Holidays rather than Merry Christmas in an attempt to be inclusive and not offend any of their customers. And you can imagine how well that was received by this so-called Christian woman, not very well. And I left the restaurant that night thinking how sad it was that was the current prevailing attitude in most American traditional Christian churches, thinking that it's okay to berate and belittle and embarrass a little teenage waitress who was just doing her job. Not very Christ-like at all. Jesus, the Christ, was all about accepting people as they were and where they were. He even famously told a woman once, I don't have to come to your mountain and you don't have to come to my temple in order to worship God. Or maybe it's the other way around. I really don't remember, but that's the whole point. It doesn't matter where you worship or what holy book you read or what name you call God. All that matters is that you worship in spirit and in truth, which of course is where we get our name. But so much of the church and so many Christians have lost sight of that along the way somehow. And instead of looking for ways to unite and include and show the love of Christ, it seems their mission has become to be as divisive and exclusive and hateful as possible. Okay, so that was my story about according to the Bible. Okay, so let's go back to the text. According to the Bible, before the erecting of the Tower of Babel, the earth and all of its inhabitants spoke one common language. And this is found in Genesis 11. We can assume this means there was one universal name for God. Thus, there was no need to argue over that name. In early Hebrew law, even saying the name of God was forbidden. Personally, I don't believe God wanted her name to be so revered that no one should dare utter it. I choose to believe that God knew having different names spoken by diverse languages would cause division among his children. When Moses finally asks God, "What is your name?" in Exodus 3, God continues to remain nameless, or at least refuses to offer Moses a specific name. Instead, God simply answers, "I am who I am." In other words, God is attempting to express to Moses that he is more of an essence than a definable name. Okay, so here it is in the last paragraph, the point I was trying to make with the story I just told you. How can the global human family be so divided over the names of God, Yahweh, Jesus, Buddha, Zeus, Krishna, Allah? All human names for God are strong points of disagreement and disunity. I believe the segregation that began at Babel was reversed on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit enabled people of different languages and cultures to understand each other. When we choose to speak in spirit, not in religion or Christianese, we will be able to connect with every person we encounter, regardless of their religion, language, or name for God. Yes, so connecting through spirit, that's the only way to peace on earth, goodwill toward men, which is supposed to be the core message of Christmas. That's the only way that's ever going to be possible. So we'll talk about that a little more in the teaching today. But now let's say the ending prayer to close out our time of devotion. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Amen. Amen. All right, deep breath in. First, let's take care of a little housekeeping. Welcome back, Lord. Yay. Surgery was successful, and you were in our thoughts, and we are so happy to see you back and healthy. And also, it is Miss Bobby's birthday today. Happy birthday, Miss Bobby. Okay, let's say our connection affirmation. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. All right, so 'tis the season. It is upon us. Christmas Day will have come and gone by the next time we gather together for connection, which, by the way, we will have connection next Tuesday morning, regular time, even though it is the day after Christmas. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, the core message of Christmas is supposed to be peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Many times we add goodwill toward all men. That's what this holiday that we commemorate on December 25th each year is supposed to be about. Yet, if we look around right now, there's not a lot of peace and goodwill to be found out in the world at large. And I'm not going to go into all the examples of this. They're all well documented. All you have to do is turn on any television to any 24-hour cable news channel. But I'm actually not recommending that because I personally believe that's one of the things that's hindering the peace process right now, which we will also get into in this teaching. So let's dive right in. I've got some quotes for you to start off. First quote, "There is no other world. There's just another way to live in it." Jacques Messer. The next three quotes are all by our friend Andrew Martin, which I'll also be quoting quite a bit today. The first that he says is, "We are limitless beings who came to play in the fields of limitation." Next, "Your liberation is up to you." And lastly, "The only conditions you can control are internal. So if you want to make a change, start there." So speaking of peace on earth or lack thereof, I want to begin today with a piece by Amanda Ellis in which she also talks about this situation of conflict and war going on in the world. And she has some very deep insights, I think, into why war is still going on this planet and what we, especially as spiritual people, can do about it, but more importantly, what we should not do because it's just not helpful. So here are some excerpts from Amanda's video that she titled, "What Now?" And I think this was recorded back when the war first broke out between Russia and Ukraine. And of course, since that time, there's been so much violence and devastation also in the Middle East. But what she's saying here really applies to all wars everywhere at any time. It's some timeless wisdom. She says, "Part of the world being at war, again, will affect us all personally in two ways. Some, it will send back into old patterns of wounding based in our own insecurities. In other words, it can make us feel very unsafe and uncertain and even frightened. Others of us, it will send into an exaggerated state of us against them. The lesson for humanity at the moment is shared coexistence, which is the opposite of invasion, war, and trying to take over." Okay, I'm going to stop right here and just say that is just another way to express peace on earth. When she says the lesson we're needing to learn right now is shared coexistence, another way to say that is the lesson we need to learn right now is how to have peace on earth. Now, whatever the reason you think this is happening doesn't really matter. It's beside the point because it's just a reflection of what's going on everywhere across the borders of other countries and even on the individual streets of our neighborhoods. We've got to learn to share and coexist with each other peacefully. Whether it's at a micro level, something between you and a neighbor or you and a family member, or on the macro level, like war between nations. It's never easy. The question for us right now as a species is, can we coexist and share the Earth's resources without killing each other? Or, again, said another way, can we achieve peace on Earth? Is it possible? What is happening on the macro level in the collective is just a reflection of what's going on within us as individuals on the micro level. Because what the world is made up of is individuals and families, communities, groups, and countries. We are all part of and what makes up that whole. When war breaks out on the macro level, people tend to go back to whatever is easiest for them to handle emotionally. And by far, the easiest narrative is us against them. We love to label someone as the aggressor and someone else as the victim. And in this particular case, some people have chosen to put the label of aggressor or villain or bad guy on Vladimir Putin. But it could very well be somebody else. That's just the role out this war, ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, as I said it a minute ago. But as we know, we're also witnessing this with what's going on in the Middle East. We've all been, many people have done this, and we've all been pressured to kind of pick a side in that conflict and then decide who we think are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Back to Amanda. Whether it's in the physical realm or you shift it to the spiritual, the easiest narrative is always that there's a good guy or good guys and bad guys. And as soon as the bad guys are dealt with and gone, all will be well again. This is what most of us believe, but it's never that simple. Some people, when looking at this situation, are actually going in the opposite direction and casting Putin in the role of good guy, which just serves to prove the whole fallacy of the good against evil paradigm. There's never a clear good versus bad because there are always going to be those who disagree with your particular perspective of the situation. This is one of the reasons why the us against them mentality is never productive and never truly resolves anything. Darkness exists in every single part of our world because it is in you and it is in me. And so until we cleanse our own darkness and our own shadow, first own it, then purge it. Now I'm going to say, I don't really like to use the word purge here because it's not something you can ever fully get rid of. I like to use the word transmute. Until we bring our own darkness and light back into balance, we are always going to see outer manifestations of its imbalance in the wider world. Outer darkness, which includes war, is only there as a reflection of the inner work we still have not done as individuals of the species. That thought triggers a lot of people, which is why they just fall back into the us against them narrative. Because again, it's much easier to have someone else to blame. But what we need to understand is that the people on our planet who are carrying out all these bad deeds are just playing a role. We are a planet of duality. We are a planet of both darkness and light. Because of this, there must be both a disruptor and a peacemaker. And until we as the collective choose to stop playing these duality games, including war, then war will continue to be a reality on our planet. Change has to start with us. So this next part is, she's going to say I, but I wanted to make it clear it's not me saying I. She's still talking. I put up a post this morning asking all who follow me to just send peace to both countries. And I asked specifically for there to be no arguments in the comment section about your personal beliefs about who started it and which side was right or wrong, and you couldn't do it. So I finally had to just switch off the ability for you to comment. We as a group on my Instagram page couldn't even agree to just send peace, love, and light and leave it at that. So, you see, she's proving her own point that she began with, that there's still so much disagreement and finger pointing and blaming and arguing going on the micro level that between a relatively small group of people who follow her on Instagram in comparison to, the whole world, that of course that's being reflected on the macro level. It's just on a bigger scale. A few thousand people who apparently have enough in common to follow the same person on Instagram can't even stop themselves from arguing and fighting, even when they have specifically been asked not to. So it's no wonder that countries can't either. Because again, countries are just made up of these people who can't even stop fighting with each other on Instagram. So back to Amanda. If we're sitting around focusing our thoughts on the fact that something awful in the world is about to happen, we're helping to manifest that thing. We are all powerful manifestors. We can manifest light, but we can also manifest darkness without even realizing that's what we're doing by focusing on the lower vibrations of what's going on or has the potential to go on in our world. We must all be brave enough to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I see my darkness. I see my shadow. Labeling external events as good or evil is meaningless until we are able to look within ourselves and see that both are present, and the one we feed the most is the one that's going to get bigger and continue on. So, are we feeding the peace within or the battle and conflict? It's all about what we do and what we say to each other and to ourselves. Are you at war with yourself? Or are you at peace within? Are you at war with your neighbor or with that person who just made a comment that you don't agree with? All of this contributes to the angst and the hostility that's present in our world right now. But if each of us can recognize this, see the darkness within ourselves, and begin to purge it on the micro level, again, I would use the word transmute, then that's where we begin to tip the balance in the external world. But we don't often do that because we don't want to look at ourselves that closely or accept the fact that our actions are a contributing factor. And because it's easier to blame them, whoever they are. All right, so just like it's easier, we've talked about before, for us to blame the devil than to say, okay, I have a little bit of responsibility for creating this mess that I'm in. It's so much easier just to say the devil did it or the devil is fighting me. But it's too easy just to blame them. And that's why the wars are still happening, because we have still not done our own inner work. Where does that begin? It begins with every single word that we utter, with every thought that we think, with every action we take, because these things build either the monsters in our midst or the angels. Okay, so thank you, Miss Amanda. Again, just reinforcing the truth that we create our own reality on all levels, micro and macro, individual and collective. I want to shift now to Dr. Christina Lopes and some information from her that I gave you previously a couple years back, in which she's talking about this us versus them mentality being a trap that you can fall into, especially during a spiritual awakening. And here she explains that all that is unchecked ego. And then she describes a better way to look at why the world is as it is and who is responsible for it. I'm reading from her piece now called The Dark Side of Spirituality. And it's in the context of what can sometimes happen when a person, or in this case, the entire world, is going through a spiritual awakening, which is what I believe is happening right now. She says, most people believe a spiritual awakening and spirituality in general is all love and light. But there is a darker side full of some common traps people fall into, especially at the beginning of their journey. The first one is an us versus them mentality. This happens if someone awakens spiritually, but somehow remains in separation consciousness. This is largely the result of not appropriately dealing with your ego. Your ego likes to see the world in terms of us versus them, or me versus another person, or me plus my small circle of like-minded friends versus the rest of the whole world. When you genuinely awaken and you deal with your ego, you are not in separation consciousness, because you understand and come into the concept of unity consciousness, realizing on a deep level that we are all connected and that we are all one. But when your ego is left in place, unchecked, a spiritual awakening can manifest itself as people thinking about certain other people, being people other than the people in the group they're in, as being evil. In a very real sense, there's no such thing as you versus anything or anyone else. The core reality is that we are all connected. The most common example of someone falling into this trap is when they begin to believe that the world is dominated by a small group of rich people for whom there are different names. And we've all heard these names: the New World Order, the elites, the Illuminati. And this belief is that these are the people who are pulling the strings and controlling world events to which the rest of us are subject. This is a really common belief within some spiritual circles, but it's just a manifestation of the old ego-driven us versus them, separation consciousness mentality. This belief has two components that are important to understand. The first is victim consciousness. Many times, even after spiritually awakening, people don't realize they are still in victim consciousness. When you hold a belief like this, that the entire world is dominated by a small group of people, you are in essence saying that you also believe everyone not in that group are victims of that group, whether they choose to be or not. The more you allow yourself to remain in this type of victim consciousness, the more powerless you will feel and be. The second component of this belief is rejection of responsibility. If I say that there's this group of people who are dominating the world, I'm basically letting go of any personal responsibility for my part in the co-creation of this process. The world is the way it is because of the individual contributions of the 7.8 billion people in it. Each of us makes choices every day that contribute to the collective reality. Okay, which is exactly what Amanda Ellis was just saying. What we think, say, and do creates either the monsters that are in this world or the angels. The minute I point my finger and say it's that person's fault, I'm throwing all the responsibility onto them. Always remember that on a spiritual level, there is no such thing as us and them. The collective consciousness and our shared reality is a product of all of us. Reality is a collective co-creation. So then it says a good mantra to remember and repeat when you realize you're falling into this trap is reality is a collective co-creation. When we believe anything other than this, it is the result of spiritual laziness. It's easier to reject personal responsibility and remain in victim consciousness, but it's also an abdication of our personal power. If there are things out there that we would like to see change, we must first change ourselves and come into our personal power. We can change nothing from a position of powerlessness. So, how do we do that? How do we begin to shift from a powerless position where we are the victim to a powerful position where we are the creator? Well, first we've got to, as both Amanda and Dr. Christina have suggested, look at ourselves, specifically our shadow, and deal with it. Recognize it, admit that we have a shadow side, and then purge, or better word, in my opinion, transmute it. A woman named Debbie Ford offers some advice on how to do this. She says the first step is to look at your life and see where you're struggling. The places in your life where you feel you don't have it all together and everything is not as you want it to be, or where you're always trying to be different than you are, but keep showing up in the same way time after time, and you keep having the same issues. Then you know that's a place where a shadow is lurking. So again, it's the same in both the micro and the macro. Why do we keep going to war with each other? Okay, so we've got to look at ourselves and say, how do we keep going to war? Because we keep showing up the same way when there's a conflict. The shadow helps us learn how to love, because anything that we judge in another is also a part of our shadow. When we think of it that way, we can begin to say, how can I be kind to that part of me? Just like we ask ourselves, how can we be kind to others who need our kindness when they are not being their best selves? As humans living in this dualistic existence, we are both the saint and the sinner, the divine and the diabolical. We are filled with and made up of both the light and the dark. As humans, we couldn't even know light without darkness. We wouldn't recognize kindness if we had never experienced meanness. We wouldn't know what it is to be selfless if we didn't understand and acknowledge what selfishness is. And that recognition of acknowledgement of, and then the embracing of the shadow teaches us true love. Because it's easy to love when you feel good and everybody's behaving like you want them to, and you have enough money and you think you look good and everything's going your way. But how do you love when you've been hurt, when you've been betrayed, or when you feel you failed at something? That's real love. And that's what the shadow effect teaches us to do. Love in those moments when it's the most difficult. This brought to my mind the line in that song we sing, when relationships demand commitment, I'll be there to love and follow through. You don't just love when things are great, when everything is seashells and balloons. You have to also be committed to relationship with yourself as well as to others in the times when everything's not so pretty. If indeed we are each a microcosm of the macrocosm, meaning we are each a piece of the whole, then our jobs as individuals is to begin by loving that piece of the whole that we are. And we must each love all that we are and embrace our angry self, our mean self, our vindictive self, our selfish self, as well as our loving self, our peaceful self, our generous self, and our abundant self. When we take responsibility for all of our different selves, then we'll start to be different humans and will show up differently as our piece of the whole, which will eventually change all of the whole. We'll stop throwing our shadows onto other people, and we'll stop telling our children, don't be this, don't be that, don't be mean, don't be angry, because all of those don't be's makes them believe they're not okay, that they're not good enough, that there's something wrong with them. All that does is cause them to hide that part of themselves in the shadow and not be able to deliver their authentic selves along with all their gifts and talents to the world. All that does is teach them that it's okay to fragment themselves. Ultimately, we are on this earth to learn to love, and not just the good parts, but all of who we are. And let's remember, this is not just referring to us telling our physical children this, but telling our own inner child this as well, which is always with us. All right, so we see a theme emerging amongst all of these different spiritual teachers who are basically saying the same thing, that it's easier to blame some nebulous them than to take our part of the responsibility for creating what's going on. And it's also easier to get caught up in following what's going on out there on the macro level than to deal with our own stuff. It's easier to stay glued to CNN and share your opinions about what's happening out there online or at the dinner table than to look inside and start fixing you, because that's actually something you can do. You personally as one person are not going to be able to do anything about what anybody said on CNN. All you can do is fix what's right here. Your comment under a Facebook post is going to do very little to change what's happening in Russia or Ukraine or Gaza or Israel. But using that same time and energy to change something about yourself could make a much bigger difference than you think. Let's go now to Andrew Martin and see what he has to say about this. This is from a piece of his called Guidance for Troubling Times, Finding Light in the Darkness. He begins with this question: how do we hold our light when we see so much tragedy in the world around us? And then he answers, nature shows us that both the light and the dark, the shadow and the light, are present in all things. Fire can cook our food and keep us warm, and it can also destroy everything. Water is the source of all life, but a flood of it can flatten a village. The same thing is true of the earth. We plant seeds in it and it gives us food, but it can also bury us under a landslide. So this idea that things are or can be separate from one another is a fallacy. Light alone is like a flat white wall. It's also blinding. But darkness alone is an endless void of nothingness. And I would add, this is this is blinding in another way. Okay, so if there's too much light, you're blinded, and if there's too much darkness, you're blinded. Either way, without enough of either, you can't, or too much of either, you can't see. So he says we must have both. Okay, I want to stop right here and give you a little visual to demonstrate what he's saying. We've been talking about ourselves as creators, right? So let's think about it in creating a piece of art, or even something as simple as writing a note or a letter, some form of communication. You start with either a white canvas, if you're going to paint a picture, or a white blank sheet of paper. So let's say that represents the light. Okay, so if you use white paint on a white canvas or white ink on a white sheet of paper, you're not going to be able to see it. You're not going to be able to create anything. You have to have black ink or some different color of paint so to provide a contrast to be able to see what it is you're creating. That's what the darkness is. It provides the contrast to the light, without which there is no creation. You know, we talk about the void being the place where everything is created. Well, the void is dark, but without that darkness, you couldn't ever create anything anyway. So you have to have both. So here he's talking about, back to him, he's talking here about standing against the darkness, which is not the same thing as fighting the darkness or resisting the darkness. It's a subtle difference in language, but it's a big difference in attitude. I taught on this a long time ago, and we might revisit that topic at some point, but fighting against something or resisting it only holds it in place and or creates more of it. But standing in the face of something or standing up to something is different. So listen to what he says here. In the natural, when we see the darkness approaching, like big black clouds rolling in, our tendency is often to run and hide, to try to find safety for ourselves. But in the spiritual sense, we must move toward the darkness with our light. Stand against it. Stand up and say, I will not be moved. Also, we must understand that our suffering in times of darkness does nothing to make anything or anyone better. My sadness and misery and disconnection from my own center is often what those who perpetrate the dark want me to do. They want me to forget my light. Now, let me stop here for just a minute and make a few comments about this. I know that last little bit sounded a lot like the us against them mentality I was talking about before. That's a trap we shouldn't fall into. But I think it's just the consequence of the limitations of language he is using to describe this. When he's saying they, I don't think he's referring to a specific group of people as in the bad guys, whoever they may be in any given situation. However, there is an energy of darkness, although we shouldn't necessarily attach names and faces to it. We should be aware of it. So let me give you an example. I was watching a news show recently, and a woman was reporting on all the incidences on social media surrounding the conflict between specifically Russia and Ukraine. And people had actually been posting photos of things like dead soldiers and claiming they were Ukrainians. And later it was proven they were not. That's not what the pictures were even of. Another showed footage of this raging fire that they were saying was a result of a bombing somewhere in Ukraine, and that was proven not to be the case. It was old footage from somewhere in China of a factory exploding, but they had put it on their social media sites saying this was in Ukraine to get people worked up about what was happening. And then there was another one that there was a woman standing in front of her crumbling house with a caption saying the current devastation in Ukraine, which was later proven to be false as well. So most unbelievably, though, on an Italian newscast, they even used footage from a video game. It wasn't even real footage of missiles going and hitting. That wasn't real at all in any sense. And the same thing is happening now with the whole thing between Israel and Gaza. So what's my point in telling you all that? I don't know who's doing that kind of stuff and why, They're probably all doing it for a variety of reasons. Each person or outlet, no doubt, has their own specific agenda. Maybe it's so they can raise money. Maybe it's just clickbait to get more traffic on their site or their page. Or maybe there are a few that are more nefarious. But the point is, no matter what their agenda is, if you fall for it and see these images and you believe they're real and you let them upset your personal peace, make you sad, make you outraged or scared, then all that does is lower your vibration. And when enough people are being affected in the same way, all this does is bring down the vibration of the entire collective. So remember what Andrew just said. Our suffering in times of darkness does nothing to make anything or anyone better. My sadness and misery and disconnection from my center only feeds into the darkness and creates more of it. And that is why they, speaking of people who are, as he puts it, perpetrating the darkness, want. It is only serving their agenda, whatever their agenda is. And it's probably not one great big worldwide evil conspiracy, or as Dr. Christina Lopes was talking about, that some people believe in. It's not this big Illuminati organization. It's probably just the little bit of darkness or selfishness or greed in each of these individual people who each have an individual agenda and are manipulating your emotions for their personal gain. So when we stay glued to bad news 24/7, that's what we're feeding into and creating more of. And what's really going on is bad enough without having to wade through all of the manufactured material that's not even true. So let's be smarter than that and not feed into that. Back to Andrew. In the face of atrocities such as war, remember that you leaving your center of well-being serves nobody, and that the most powerful thing you have is a response that comes from the heart and from your light, which is why you need to learn how to protect your peace and not stay glued to all this negative stuff 24/7. Tell yourself, I love what he says here. Tell yourself, I will not meet trauma with trauma. I will not meet fear with fear. I will meet it all with love. And when you forget how to do that, that's a sign that you need to stop, turn off the TV and the computer, put your phone down, go outside and connect with nature. Wherever you need to go and whatever you need to do to recenter yourself in your light and in your power. And then you can ask, what can I do? How can I serve? And when you ask that, make sure you're asking from your heart, because the intellect only knows things historically, and that is its limitation. The intellect can only know what has already happened. It is not the visionary part of you. The visionary is the intuitive feeling center. We often try to put the intellect in charge of solving these major world problems: oppression, violence, chaos, trashing the planet, and war. But if the intellect were the solution, we would not be where we are. When we use the intellect alone, all we're thinking is, how do I fix this? And we're looking to history to find that answer. And if all we've got to look at is history, then all we have access to is the broken pieces of the thing that's already not working. So we're trying to rebuild something out of broken parts. That's never going to work. The only answer is to go into a deeper part of ourselves to find something new. All right, so remember that he said that, because we're going to talk about that more at the end of this teaching. So he's saying we've been using our intellect, our minds, our heads to try to solve these problems for centuries now, and it hasn't worked. But for some reason, we keep showing up the same way. So we have to look in a new place. And it's also interesting that he said we must go deeper into ourselves to find the answer, not outside ourselves. We've already done that too. We've already been there, done that, got the t-shirt. That doesn't work. Listen to what he says here. He's talking about everyone who just wants God to handle it, the people who think that the only solution is divine intervention, the people who are constantly praying for peace, but then not looking for the peace inside themselves. He says, when people ask, why would God allow this to happen? Why doesn't the divine just come down and say it's done and make it all better? The answer is because the only way humans learn is through our own understanding. We only learn through our physical experience. So even if God suddenly waved a wand and there was instantly peace on the planet, the ideas that created war and violence won't have gone anywhere. They would still be right here. The divine says to us, you can have anything you want, but you must choose it first. We can't go 2 minutes on this planet without calling for the death of someone. Okay, time out. Remember what we talked about earlier when I was relaying the story about Amanda Ellis's having to shut down her comment section because even after she asked for no arguments, people could not help themselves and had to say their piece about who they thought was right and who they thought was wrong in the situation, instead of just sending peace, light, and love to everyone involved like she had asked them to. So that's what he means when he says we have to choose it. Andrew again. God could stop every war on the planet this afternoon, and by morning we'd mess it up and someone somewhere would be fighting again. We must find the seeds of what we want for the world within ourselves first, as within, so without, because we have to be at the frequency of love in order to manifest it. We can't get to love and peace from anger and misery. So let's choose light. Let's choose love. Let's choose forgiveness and compassion. And don't worry if you think it seems insignificant and small in comparison to the problems that need to be solved. If the only thing you can do is remember your light, that is where you start. You start by asking, where is my light today? Where is my peace and my power right now? You start by finding that, your peace and your power and your light, and showing it in small ways at first, and then it becomes the ember that you gently blow upon until it becomes a raging inferno within you, and then you can ask, okay, Spirit, how can I move to make a mark in the world? But that must begin by moving the mark within yourself, because how we treat ourselves is how we treat the world. Wow, that was so powerful. I want to close today with parts of an inspirational speech, which I'm sure I will not do proper justice to, from a television series. And I have shared this with you before, but it's very powerful, just like that last piece was, and it fits so well with the teaching today. And this series just so happens to have been filmed in our old cathedral. It's from a show called Greenleaf. And this is part of the eulogy that a wife, the first lady of the church, was giving for her husband, the late bishop of this church. And I want you to listen to it today in the context of what we've been talking about. She says, we know, no, this is not it yet. She said, we know that, so the old way that we've been trying to fix things in the world isn't working anymore. Our old ways of war and violence isn't solving anything. And it's definitely not producing peace on earth. So what we need is a new world. And as our first quote today said, there is no other world. There's just a different way to live in it. So that's where everything starts. That's what we have to learn to do. Everything starts within us. It all comes from inside. So if we want to create a new world, there is only one prayer we need to pray. Not necessarily pray for peace on earth, but pray this prayer, which is make me new. Because all of us me's are what make up the world. So Here, in the words of the fictional First Lady May Greenleaf, is my closing for today. She's speaking specifically to her husband's congregation, and so she refers to a new church. But I'm going to take advantage of poetic license and change the word church to the word world, because that's what we're talking about today. She sets it up by telling the congregation that she asked her husband, who has now made his transition, what she should say at his funeral, and he said, "May, tell them something new." So then she continues, "I want to talk about the new. Behold, the prophet Isaiah said, speaking for God, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it?" And so today, I want us to think together about the new. I want us to dream together about the new. Not what this world has been, but what it has never been before. What we can't even imagine the world to be. I stand here before you at the edge of infinity with no ideas, no plans, with my arms and my heart and my mind open. And I am saying, "Oh Lord Jesus, make me something new. Show me forgiveness where there could be none. Redemption when it's far too late. Water where the well long ago ran dry. Acceptance where there is hate. Show me what I can't explain. Make me what I don't think I can become. Make me new. Let us learn to love our past enough to let it go and move forward into the future." And then she has the entire congregation say together in unison with her, "Make me new." And that's it. That's how we make a new world, by each of us asking for help and guidance, and then doing the inner work to make ourselves new. So if you want to see wars come to an end, and if you want to be a part of creating a new earth or to bringing peace on the earth that we already have, stop focusing on all that is external and start making yourself new. That's the best Christmas present you can give anybody. Amen? Amen. All right, so Benny's going to help me today because Miss Diane texted me this morning. She had a doctor's appointment that she had to go to. She tells everybody she loves you, she misses you, she'll see you next week. Let's sing Blessed Always.
Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen.
Be at peace. Have a great week. We will see you next week.